1,949 years since Kurban Bayesheni, Anachnu Lo Nashamu. The specific avoda for Leil Tisha is crying. Bocho Sifke Balayla. That crying compensates and is a tikkun for the Bechia Shel Chinam, the useless crying, wasted crying that Klal Yisrael did by HaRav this night. In some sources, the Bechia is called Bechia Ledoros. And in other sources, it's called Bechia Shel Mamish. Understand what the Bechia Ledoros is and what the Bechia Shel Mamish is, what we're supposed to accomplish tonight with that cry. In order to understand what has to be corrected, you have to understand what the Bechia Shel Chinam is. Predominantly, Bechia Shel Chinam is a Bechia of Yush, Pachad, without Emunah, without Bitochen. That's called useless, wasted cry. There's more than that. It's not just that Klal Yisrael cried and felt abandoned, hopeless, but they actually held that the Rebbeinu hated them. Sinas Hashem Osanu. And then he took us out from Mitzrayim to decimate us by having us killed by the 7 nations in Eretz Yisrael. And we thought the reason was because we're Obdei Avodah Zorah in Mitzrayim, therefore the Rebbeinu was getting even with us. That in itself is a terrible hate. To imagine that the Rebbeinu hates Klal Yisrael, to see the punishments as the Rebbeinu Shalom trying to hurt us, instead of seeing it the opposite, that all of the tzaras and all the Yisurim are my Avas Hashem. Asher Yaser Ishes Beno Hashem Elokecha Miasreka. Sometimes a parent has to act not like a father but like a stranger. Yaser Ishes Beno, not Avas Beno. In order to be able to discipline the child to make sure that he remains on the right path. That is the Nisayan of Hester Ponim. To realize that the Rebbeinu Shalom never abandons Klal Yisrael, never hates us and separates himself from us. And when we don't realize that, and when we say, Al ki'ein alo abekir mi mitzauni haro sa'elu, it's because the Rebbeinu Shalom abandoned me. He's no longer with me. Then HaRav, the punishment becomes even greater. Then Manochi Hashter Ashtir Ponai, double Hashter Ponai. I was thinking perhaps that's the idea of Sinas Chinam, to relate it to Bechia Shel Chinam. Bechia Shel Chinam is that Klal Yisrael thought the Rebbeinu Shalom hated them. We have a mitzvah, Yohavta l'reacha kamocha. Torah says, Lo sisnes achicha b'lvavecha. Don't hate your brother in your heart. Ocheach tochiach esamisecha. Even if you have tinus, give him musar, give him tochacha. And then, Yohavta l'reacha kamocha, ani Hashem. Sfarim say, what's the Ani Hashem? If you want me to be your father, then you have to recognize that every other Jew is your brother. Because if he's not your brother, then I'm not your father, because I'm his father. A person can have kindness on people. They can give musar and tochacha. But lo sisnes achicha bilvavecha. Because if you have that separation in your heart, and you can hate another Jew, that means you think the Rebbeinu Shalom hates him. Because if the Rebbeinu Shalom loves him, how could you hate him? And therefore, if you have to riacha kamocha, any sina, it's not stam for kindness. Because you actually feel a hatred in your heart for another Jew. That has a connection to the Bechiyah Shalchina, where a Jew feels that the Rebbeinu Shalom is impossible for the Rebbeinu Shalom to hate Jews. The Medrash says, just like Yosef HaTzadik was Matthias, his brothers Bebechi, he cried, and in that way they made up. So too, Klal Yisrael will return and have a piyus with the Rebbeinu Shalom B'schus HaBechi. Will come crying. And that will patch up our relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom, bring us back to Eretz Yisrael and build the Beis HaMikdash. The Zohar HaKodesh in Shmos says on the posek Vatiftach Vatireu es Hayelet V'hinei Nar Bocher Vatach Molalov Vatomer Miyaldei Ho'ivrim Zeh. As Paro opened up the teva that Moshe Rabbeinu was in, she saw a Nar Bocher. She had Rachmanis on it. She said Miyaldei Ho'ivrim Zeh. Zohar Kodesh says she knew it was a Jewish child because Jews know how to cry. We have a soft heart, submissive, bechi, the Svarim say, is a sign of submission. The Bachya says that's why Vidui has to be done, the Leil Nishbar v'nitke, with bechi. Because vidui has to be done with submission. Crying is a sign of submission. Jews know how to cry. We have a soft heart. We're submissive. That's how she knew it was Miyaldei. She called the mother of the baby, and the Zohar says that she was also crying. The hallmark of Klal Yisrael is that we know how to cry. Know how to cry the proper way. Unfortunately, we also know how to cry the improper way. There's another medrash that relates the geula to crying by Shiluach HaKein. The Zohar says that when you take the mother bird and you send it away, it cries, separated from its children. And that crying is ma'orer, a kan sipor lamala, a spiritual kan sipor. And the mother in heaven, the Rebbeinu Shalom Shechina, cries for his children, and that brings Mashiach closer. It's not only mother birds that cry when they're young, that are ma'orer, the crying in Shamayim. Unfortunately, Rav Oshri in Shilas and Shuvas Mimamakim brings a Shaila. Someone asked him, a man came and wanted a heter to commit suicide because he knew that when the Nazis would come, their cruel custom was to kill the family in front of the father and kill him last. And he said, the torture of seeing my wife and children killed before my eyes is something that I couldn't stand. So give me permission to commit suicide. I shouldn't have to see that. The same thing happened in Nemirov. Nemirov in Gzeres Tach V'Tat. The city of Nemirov in Poland was destroyed by the Cossacks during Gzeres Tach V'Tat in 1648. A historian of the time records that Rav Yechiel Michal, the Rav of Nemirov, a young man, tremendous Talmud Chacham, jumped into the water to save himself by swimming. But a Russian seized him and wanted to murder him. The scholar convinced him not to kill him by promising him a great deal of silver and gold. Polak agreed and took him to his house, where the silver and gold were hidden. The Cossack then let him go alive. The scholar then left that place and hid in a certain house there with his mother until the morning. On the morrow, the second day of Sivan, the Cossacks were also searching the houses, thinking perhaps some Jew might be hidden there. Talmud Chacham then fled with his mother to the cemetery, so that if they should be killed, they'd be in the cemetery and thus receive a burial. But it happened as he approached the place, one of the men of the place, a Russian shoemaker, ran after the scholar with a club in his hand and wounded him with it. The mother of the rabbi begged the Cossack to kill her instead of her son. The man paid no attention to her, killed first the sage and then his mother. Shem Yimkom Dama. So we've had not only birds that have been crying for their children to be Ma'ora Rachmim Bashamayim, but generations of Klal Yisrael, that mothers and fathers crying for their children that were not merely taken but slaughtered in front of their eyes. The opposite of Shiluach HaKein. Goyim are hard-hearted. In contrast, the Zohar says that Jews have a heart of flesh. Jews are able to cry. Goyim can see the most gruesome things and not cry at all. Another Maisa that Rav Aronson brings down in his Sefer Alei Maroros, of a young boy in a concentration camp who committed a terrible crime, took 2 little apples off a tree. The guard saw him, he did not think twice, pointed his revolver at the boy and shot him. The boy was bleeding profusely, but he was still alive. A group of Jews carried the boy back to the camp. The commandant of the camp heard that this boy had been shot, but he was not dead. He commanded that the boy be brought into the shower room, that no one should try to give him any help, but just let him lay there and die in agony. The entire day the boy moaned and groaned, and our hearts shuddered, writes Rav Aronson. At night we snuck into the bathhouse and gave him some water. The next day the commandant commanded they shoot the boy in the head, but even with the bullet in his head he continued to live. The commandant was astounded. There's a boy shot in the head and still continues to live. So he invited tens of German women from the city to see this interesting wonder. It's beyond belief that a human being could be so cruel, and that these 20 or so women came to see an oddity, a boy who's been shot in the head, refuses to die. That's a goyish heart, as opposed to Yiddish women and men who have a heart of flesh and blood, and a heart that cries. The truth is that after almost 2,000 years, it's hard for us to cry. And therefore the Medrash says that Klal Yisrael told Yirmiyahu Hanavi, we'll cry at night, you cry in the daytime. Yitzchak Breuer explains this medrash, that when things are difficult, when it's night and there's sorrows, we live in generations where we're persecuted, so then we can cry. Because we're not only crying for the past, we're crying for the present too. But b'yom, when things are bright and Jews live in relative safety, prosperity, so it's hard to cry. So then we tell Yirmiyahu Hanavi, you cry. You cry for us. But it's not just that Yirmiyahu cries for us, but Yirmiyahu put into Sefer Eicha all the tears of all the generations. And in Eicha is the key that enables us to cry even in the daytime, even when things are not terrible for us, but we have our hearts open from Yirmiyahu Hanavi to be able to cry for others, to be able to cry for all the generations of Klal Yisrael. Sometimes we also become very insensitive to even the sorrows around us. The Berenson tells of a 14-year-old boy whose father died in the camp. They took him out to be buried, and his son asked him if he could go along. The 14-year-old boy escorted his father to Vaya, but when they got to the cemetery, they saw the boy had disappeared. They buried the father. On the way back, they saw the boy. The boy had some bread in his hand. He had obviously run away to somehow scavenge a piece of bread. They said to him, how could you do such a thing? You went to attend the Levaya of your father. You should be mourning the death of your father. How could you run away? And his answer was simple. I was hungry. Sometimes our own tzrachim and our own needs cloud our vision. Don't let us see what there is to cry about. And even if it's difficult to cry, the Seder Hayom says, if we can't open up our hearts, and because we live, Baruch Hashem, in a generation where Klal Yisrael are not persecuted per se, even though there's plenty to cry about too. Maybe we don't see children slaughtered in the eyes of their parents, but not too far away from here, not too long ago, we saw parents and grandparents slaughtered in the eyes of their children and grandchildren. Isn't that something to cry about? Sometimes we become so callous and so complacent that we can't cry. So what do we do on Tisha B'Av? Says the Seder Hayom, at least look like Meso Muta Lefana, because the Chitzonios is Ma'ora the Pnimios. If you can't cry inside, at least go through the motions on the outside. The Shalach says similarly. That's what we tell the Rabbanu Shalom. Shema Hashem Kol Bichi. Not Bichi. Can't cry. But I can make it sound like I'm crying. At least Kol Bichi. If I can't really cry, at least make it sound like you're crying. Because when you go through the motions, it creates the emotions. Crying itself is a siman of submission. It's a siman that we haven't gotten what we want. When a person wants something very badly and he's not able to get it, he cries. The Maral says crying is a sign of loss. The Ksav Kabbalah says Bechi has a connection to the word mevucha, where a person's confused. But all of those things, feeling a loss, and feeling confused, and feeling that we don't have what we want, shouldn't lead a person to Bechia Shulchina, to Yiyush, from that confusion, but it's to cry like a baby. How do you cry like a baby? A baby is confused, something's wrong, can't really conceptualize what's wrong, hungry, wet, cold, hot. The baby cries, but not out of desperation. The babies learn very quickly that if he cries and makes enough noise, someone's going to appear very quickly, usually in the form of a woman, who's going to know exactly what the problem is and take care of it. That's the kind of crying a person has to cry at Tisha. Not the crying of Yiyush, not the crying of desperation, but the crying of a baby. To realize that no matter what sorrows we have and have had, and that have not been corrected, it's not because Chas v'Shalom the Rebbeinu Shalom hates us. Just the opposite. It's because he loves us enough to deal with us. As it says in the end of Eicha, Ki im ma'os ma'ashtanu, if Rebbeinu Shalom, you really hate us, you're disgusted with us, then kotzavto leinu ad ma'o, why do you deal with us so long? So gotten rid of us long ago. The fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom deals with us for so long is because he knows there's hope. He's giving us a chance to be able to be rehabilitated. And this Bechia L'Doros is not only a Bechia for all generations, it's also a Bechia of all generations. A Bechia Shel Doros. The story is told in the time of Queen Maria Theresa of Austria. Many horrible decrees were decreed on the Jewish nation. The famous Stadler, the communal worker of Zalman Korov, was sent as an emissary to the queen, who was known to have a heart, to beg that the decree should be lifted. He came to the queen, he began to cry bitterly, and began to scream. The queen said, "Why are you crying and screaming? It's not proper. This is not the way to behave. It's a crass way to behave. You come to a queen, speak nicely, calmly, not screaming and crying." Zalman said, "You don't hear the screams and cries of one man. You hear the screams and cries of thousands of Jews through my throat. It's impossible to do that quietly." He explained to the people back in his Kehillah, this is exactly what happened with Bas Paro. She opened the teva, she saw a baby, but she heard the voice of a mature young man. How could a little baby cry with such a strong voice? And she said, this is the cry of all Jewish children. Moshe is crying for all the Jewish children, all of them through his throat. That's why he's so strong. That's what we have to hear tonight also. The crying of all the generations. Yirmiyahu Hanavi gave us the key to hear that through Megillas Eicha. To be able to hear that cry. That is also the crying of Rachel Imeinu, which gives hope for the future. Mini kolev mi bechi. But the Medrash says something else. The Pasuk seems to say that it was Rachel's crying that convinced the Rebbeinu Shalom yesh tikva lachriseh. The Medrash says something else. The Medrash says that Rachel Imeinu said to the Rebbeinu Shalom that, why are you so upset with the Jewish people? Because they put a pestle in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So you're upset. I also had something similar to that. They put my sister in my place on my wedding night. And I had Rahmanis on her. And I gave her the Simonim. If I, a human being, can do that, then Rebbeinu Shalom, you can look the other way if they put a pestle in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So which was it? Was it Rachel Imeinu's crying? Or was it time? Well, the idea is the following. Why would the Rebbeinu Shalom care if they put a pestle in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Because it's such a chil Hashem. And if the Rebbeinu Shalom looks the other way, because it creates a situation where people think that it doesn't make a difference what you do. There's no din and no dying, and that's the opposite of the whole purpose of this world. The world was created to din, and if people are given the impression that the world is hefker, so it's not worth, so the Rebbe has to punish Klal Yisrael. Otherwise, the world has a bad impression of what the whole world is about. Rachel Imenu said, no, there's another way of understanding. It's possible for a human being to be so sensitive to another person, so sensitive to my sister, that my own tsar of having my sister take my place was overshadowed by my sister's tsar to me, that she would be embarrassed. If a human being can feel like that, then they can understand, Rabbanu Shalom, the reason you're not punishing us is not because less din, less die, because you also feel our pain. And it makes that difference to you. And that's why we're not being punished. So if that's the case, you can forgive them. And that was Rachel Imenu's cry. When someone so sensitive cries, their tears mean something. That's the idea. In addition, the Alshich says, Bechia at night, Bechia has two purposes. One is to express your sorrow, the pain, it hurts, you cry. The other is because you're reaching out that someone should help you. At night, when people can't see, the crying is because of the pain. In the daytime, it's reaching out to be helped. So we cry because of the pain, but through Yirmiyahu Hanavi, he cries in the daytime when he can cry out to the Rabbanu Shalom and get results. The Chiyah is recognizing that something's missing. The Hemik Dover says it's a covet for the nifter when people cry for someone who died, because it shows he made a difference, that his loss makes a difference. And the more crying there is, the more it shows the loss is greater, says the Kliyot. Chazal say that when Esav HaRasha came in and found out that he lost the brachas, he cried. One tear fell from his right eye, and that was the end of the first Beis Hamikdash. A second tear fell from his left eye, and that was the end of the third Beis Hamikdash. And a third tear welled up in his right eye, but it didn't fall. Had that tear fallen, there wouldn't have been a third Beis Hamikdash. All the crying that we cry is to counteract those crying of Esav. If Esav appreciated the brachas so much that he cried for them, and we don't appreciate them because we gave them up, then it's a terrible, terrible kitrug on Klal Yisrael. So if we sit here and cry and recognize what we lost and feel bad about it and appreciate the brachas that we had and cry over the fact that we lost them, then we'll counteract and dissolve those tears of Esav and be able to have a geula. All the bechios and all the tzoros of all the generations are included in Churban Beis Hamikdash. Rosh Hashiva of Giftus, that's out. Explained the Medrash, Rabbi Gamliel had a widow in his neighborhood who lost her children. And she used to cry at night, and Rabbi Gamliel would cry along with her till his eyebrows fell off. Because when Rabbi Gamliel heard her crying, it reminded him that all those sorrows, even the personal sorrows, are a result of Churban Beis Hamikdash. He cried for the Beis Hamikdash. Tonight, the stars cry and the malachim cry, as it says in the keynote. The entire creation is crying. And the Rebbeinu Shalom himself is crying because it hurts him to have to see us sit on the floor, but he knows that that's what we need to be rehabilitated because he loves us. And the Rebbeinu Shalom would stay along with us. Perhaps that should bring us to do tshuva. After tragically losing a child, Mrs. Hannah Rothstein was inconsolable. She had a family chasana to go to. They forced her to go and attend the chasana. But she couldn't control herself. She started to cry uncontrollably. One of the guests of the chasana, an elderly woman, saw her there crying. She said to her mamala, said the compassionate woman in a thick European accent, I can tell that you're not really speaking to anyone, and I'm not going to tell you not to cry. Believe me, I know what it means to cry. I survived Auschwitz, and sometimes I can't stop crying either. Stroking Mrs. Rothstein's shaking hand, the elderly woman continued, but mamala, while you're crying, don't just cry for yourself. Cry for people who are sick. Cry for people who need Yeshuos. Cry for the Churban Beis Hamikdash. Then your tears will not be in vain. That's the way to cry. That's Bechiyah L'Doros. If you're crying already for your own sorrows, think everybody has their sorrows that they can cry about. Then sublimate them and direct them towards Churban Beis Hamikdash. Crying itself can have tremendous effect. Shortly after World War II, in one of the displaced persons camps, an irreligious young man was brought to the Klosenberger Rebbe. I heard that before the war you were the top bocher in Munkacher Yeshiva, the Rebbe said to him. What happened to you? He said, I saw the best were burned and only the psolis remained. The former yeshiva bocher replied, you're so right, the Rebbe answered him. The best were burned and only the psolis remained. Then the Rebbe, who had lost his wife and 11 children during the war, burst out crying. The two sobbed together for over half an hour. Eventually, the young man returned to full religious observance. On his return, he said, had the Rebbe given me one word of tochacha, I would have walked out and never returned. But he just cried with me. Sometimes crying can have so much better effect, even than tochacha, and can bring us back to the Rebbeinu Shalom. 12 o'clock one morning, there was an incessant knocking at the entrance of the home of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Shlomo Zalman opened the door to find a couple standing there. He ushered them inside and asked how he could be of help. From the look of pain on their faces, it was obvious they were in great pain. The two took turns describing their predicament. They were a chassan and a kala, and a beis din in Yerushalayim had just determined they could not get married because there was a strong doubt regarding the purity of the kala's lineage. They pleaded with Shlomo Zalman for help. Is there anything you can do for us, they begged. The great tzaddik looked at them lovingly. I'm not sure, he said. Halacha is halacha, what can I do? He thought for a moment. Then again, there is something I can do for you. Ich can weinen. I can cry for you. Shlomo Zalman began to cry. He cried profusely, causing alarm to his family members who were still awake as they wondered what was troubling their great father. He then gave the engaged couple a bracha, wishing them the best. The next day, after returning home from delivering his shiur at Kol Torah, Shlomo Zalman heard a knock at his door. There once again stood the young couple. The chassan spoke up. We came to tell the Rav some good news. A first-hand witness from Brazil has come forward and testified that the question that was raised regarding my kala's lineage was completely unfounded. The beis din has ruled that her yichus is 100% kosher and that we may marry. The Sada Kedushin at the wedding was none other than Rav Shlomo Zalman. Sometimes crying itself can solve the problem. Therefore, get ready to read Eicha, ready to start another Tisha B'Av, ready to fulfill the avoda of Bocho Sivke Balayla. Let's feel the tzara of the Rabbanu Shalom and cry for that. One more Maisa of what to cry about. Maisa with Mrs. Hoffman. We had a daughter who went off the derech. And daughter went from bad to worse until one day the police came and informed them that the daughter who had run away to somewhere in California had died an overdose of drugs. During Shiva, the mother was inconsolable, cried and cried and cried. And her little daughter said to her, "Mommy, everybody has to die sometime. Why are you crying so much?" She said, "I'm not crying because your sister died. I'm crying because of the way that she lived." Sometimes you have to understand what we're crying about, what really makes a difference, what really there is to cry about. Yirtz Hashem, be able to cry, Kayim, the mitzvah, Bocho Sivke Balayla, and to feel that we are Shomimi. It's not just Yerushalayim is destroyed. We say in Tachman, Re'eh Yeshomim Oseinu, and then V'ha'ir Hashem Nikra Shimcha Alecha. Before we cry about Churban Abayis, we cry about our own Churban. There are so many situations of Yidden that are far from their heritage. We cry about them, cry about the portions of our life where we're far away. Just to end, how important it is to cry for that. How important it is to bring back those souls that are a churban. Chaim Weintraub was involved with the Mischaskim program of Leil Achim. He dealt with boys that were off the derech. He had a son, a 3-year-old, who the day after his upsharing died suddenly in the Gan. He was sitting Shiva, and a group of the boys that he was close with, who were not from, who had gone off the derech, came to be Menachem Av. And one of the boys got up and said, "We've decided," he declared, as his friends looked on, "that as a schus for your son, we will all refrain this Shabbos from smoking, driving, and really from all Chil Shabbos. For this Shabbos, the Ilui Nishmas your son." Chaim laughed. He said, "Did you hear what those boys are doing?" He said to the people around, "It's unbelievable." So one of the people there in the room said, "I don't get it. Why are you so touched? These boys are totally secular, so they won't smoke or drive for one Shabbos. Who cares? Next Shabbos they'll be right back to being Mechal Shabbos. What's the point?" Chaim shook his head slowly and said, "Imagine if a Malach would arrive right now to inform us that this coming Shabbos we'll be able to have our Shleimal back with us, just for Shabbos, one solitary Shabbos. How much would I be willing to pay for that privilege? I'll tell you. I would sell my dira, the clothes off my back. I would take on debts for the rest of my life just to have Shleimal back for one Shabbos." The Eibishter is in pain, as only a father can be, for every lost neshama. Imagine the simcha he'll experience when an entire group of his lost sons comes home for Shabbos. And don't worry, next Shabbos I'll invite them all to my home. I'll have to refrain from Chilul Shabbos again. The next week I'll think of something else. Soon they won't come back. I'll never see my Shlomo in this world again. Hashem Nosan, Hashem lokach Yishem Hashem Mevorach. There's nothing I can do. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu will yet have his kinderlich back. There's something I can do about that. That's something to cry about. Yirtz Hashem, if we cry and fulfill Bachol Sivke Balayla, then Hazori, Bedima, the Rina Yipzoru, and for those Bechi who come, Yirtz Hashem, Yeshua, the Karo, the Diaspora Tzedek,